All right, today I'm here with Marco Garcia, former Ford engineer, and he's going to be our first host on Between Two Cones. So Marco, you worked at Ford for about 13 years?
That's correct. Yeah.
What was your duties there at Ford, especially around the time of the S550 development?
During the S550 development, I did NVH and also did Vehicle Dynamics. So a lot of time was spent on track and testing and tuning for vehicle dynamics, ride handling, and those kinds of things.
Okay, and some of the test mules y'all used during development had some kind of code names. What were those?
Right, so they're internal code names, but I think you can find them out on the internet. X1 is a pretty odd-looking vehicle. It has the newer vehicle underneath, and then most times the old vehicle on the outside. So you'd have a
S197 underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have S197 on top and S550 architecture underneath. Then you have an M1, which is a little further along, and then a VP. So I was involved during the X1, M1s, and VP prototypes.
And they do that to try to disguise what the new body style is going to look like without having to camouflage it. You can be basically driving around in one of the old cars and have the new underpinnings underneath.
There's a lot of reasons. One of the big reasons is cost. Yeah. So you can, and also lead time for doing parts. So suspension, engines, those cost a lot of money. So you want to kick those off early, and therefore you can graft those expensive long lead parts on the bottom of the vehicle and leave the old sheet metal, because it's really cost effective to do it that way.
Sure. When we're mentioning some of these code names, the S197 Mustang was the 05 to 14. The S550 was the 15 and up. That's what we've been talking about a lot in our Vorshlag Tech Tip videos. And we're going to talk a little bit about the brakes and some of the testing that Marco did early on. So you were a vehicle dynamics engineer.
Yes.
You came in, and I've talked to other Ford engineers. You usually work a 6-month rotation and kind of go through different programs, or were you in there for the long haul?
I was in there for one of those rotations, correct. So I was in there for about 6 months on NVH, and then 6 months on Vehicle Dynamics.
Okay. The S197 chassis was a little bit unique in that it had some and I don't know if you can talk about this, and that's the complicated thing. He no longer works at Ford, but there's still some things that Marco can't discuss. Can you talk at all about like the Boss Mustang and the track pack testing, or what that involves, or is that out of bounds?
Yeah, so the Boss Mustang and the track pack Mustangs, there's a rigorous durability that they have to go through, so a lot of requirements, and there's physically actually on track. They have to spend a certain amount of time on track, and certain temperatures like oil temperature and coolant temperature and other temperatures need to stay within certain limits, so that they can be certified as track ready.
Okay.
So the Boss vehicles, as well as S197 track packs on the 13 and 14s, those all pass with flying colors. Those are durability tests.
And the S197 chassis, the big difference, I mean, it still had a Coyote motor, but it was a solid axle car. And what are the advantages of a solid axle when it comes to temperature and fluid and things like that?
One of the big things we found out, I found out, and I think they found out in the 2000s, was a big solid axle we call stick axle internally. The stick axle has big cooling tubes, so the tubes that go out to the wheels, those act as heat sinks. So there's a big opportunity to cool the axle just by natural architecture, radiant heat. Whereas an IRS
is a small unit.
Just like on the Cobra R for 2000, it had to have a cooler to cool that IRS because there's really nowhere for the heat to go. It stays within the differential.
Okay. So for show and tell, to show what an IRS, independent rear suspension diff, looks like, this is an aluminum IRS out of an S550 Mustang. This is the aluminum one was only used on the 4-cylinder cars and the V6s, I believe, but the steel or iron unit was used on the V8 cars. So yeah, there's just a lot less surface area to radiate heat. If you've got big giant tubes that are, almost 6 feet wide, there's a lot more surface area for that fluid can actually travel down those tubes.
Right.
And we still had some heat issues in our S197 early on. We used a clutch style diff, and we figured out later when we went to a Torsen style differential, there's a lot less heat. We weren't burning up axle seals and stuff like that. So talk a little bit about the 2000 Cobra R had an IRS, and what was the solution there?
It was a differential cooler. So there was a cooler that would grab air and with fluid transfer, basically have fluid go through the cooler, just like a radiator.
Just a heat exchanger.
Heat exchanger, and cool the fluid.
And we've seen that with some of the 99 to 04 regular Cobras, the guys that track them, they have some extreme temperatures in the back, and that was the fix, was the 2000 Cobra R cooler.
Yeah, basically, that's the only way I've seen that you could cool an IRS effectively. for track duty. Is having a dedicated cooler for it.
As a quick sidebar, a friend of mine worked at Roush during the time when they were turning the 99 Cobras into the Bondurant cars, and I think that's one of the things they kind of came up with. It kind of bled over into Ford for the Cobra R, so it's just kind of a funny side story. But yeah, constant track use, like at a Bondurant school. It's not just 15 minutes at a time where you're just putting hours and hours and hours on it. There's a lot of heat generated in any gear set, in a transmission and a differential. There's a lot of heat in the engine oil that has to be radiated. But that was the beauty of the Boss and the track pack cars, is they, without an external cooler, they just had a few tweaks and things that allowed them to make this track pack rating, I guess what Ford called it. Right. And I know we can't talk specifics, but it was a really long test. Yeah. It's pretty grueling, some of the tests they put these through. Now, can we talk about the S550 in that aspect? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the S550 Mustang GT doesn't have that rating, but the Shelby, I believe, does, and the Shelby has a lot of coolers. What do you know about the coolers on the Shelby?
So the Shelby has 3 major coolers, of course. This guy has an oil cooler that's inside the front end of the vehicle.
Sure.
There's transmission cooler, and there's also a rear diff cooler. So it has 3 major coolers that help keep all the relevant fluids for track use is within limits.
There's a target temperature they have to stay underneath.
Correct.
What's the downsides if they go above that target temperature?
The risk of going prolonged above temperatures is oil starts to vaporize above 150 degrees Celsius. So once you get above 150 degrees Celsius, it starts to go into the air, and you lose fluid. So there's a risk there of actually having fluid loss through the air.
Yeah. One of the big changes on the Shelby versus the S550 Mustang is they went away from the Getrag cooler, and they went, or Getrag transmission, and they went to this Tremec. I think it's a 3160 or something. It was one from a Cadillac. But I think it's because it has provisions for a cooler. There's some challenges cooling the regular Getrag MT82. We haven't tried that yet, but I understand that's it's almost impossible to cool that transmission.
Yeah, I think it is almost impossible. There's some internal issues with having a cooler on it. It just does not like to have fluid go back into it.
Back into the fill plug, yeah.
Back into it. Whereas the Tremec has an internal pump.
Yeah.
And when they released the GT350, there was a tech pack and track pack, and those that got the tech pack found out very early that they couldn't cool the transmission, and to get a transcooler was a try and swap. They needed to have that internal pump.
That's a challenge. So Shelby guys, if you're planning on doing a lot of track use, definitely get the track pack, because that cooler is pretty critical. The Camaro 1LE has that. A lot of the cars that are making these 500-ish horsepower ratings are tending to have coolers on the differential, on the transmission, on the engine, dedicated coolers.
And the good thing about the Shelby, the GT350 is, I believe at 17 or 18 they became standard. So Ford kind of realized that there was a lot more people tracking the cars than they originally thought. So the tech pack kind of went away, and it absorbed all the coolers that it needed to survive on the track.
Okay. Yeah, we've noticed that too. We sell a camber plate for the S550. A lot of guys are really happy with that in the Shelby community. It seems to be like the #1 mod with them. A lot of the Shelby guys we talk to every day. We sell several sets of these a day, and sometimes they'll call in and say, "Hey, we always ask them, what was your car before?" It's almost always been a Porsche. There's a lot of 911 and a lot of GT3 guys are coming in, and they expect that GT3 level of track capabilities in a Shelby, and amazingly they're getting it, other than the tech pack cars that didn't have it early on, and I heard about some of the limp mode issues. So so the brakes, the Shelby obviously has a pretty crazy 2-piece rotor, big, giant, but the base Mustang, the 15 Mustang, had this inverted hat 14-inch design, and this 4-piston caliper right here, which we have seen some challenges with. Early on when we started doing S550 testing, they all had the performance pack, which is a very carefully worded thing, but the performance pack cars had a very different rotor, and you were part of the team, I think, that kind of guided that. Can you talk a little bit more about the issues you saw with this inverted hat rotor and the pluses as well? There are some good things about it.
Sure. So part of my role in vehicle dynamics was ensuring that a certain model would survive the racetrack. So I got very familiar with the brake systems on all 3 levels. So there's actually 3 levels of brakes.
Right, yeah.
So there's a base brakes, which is on the EcoBoost V6.
Yeah.
Which is a 2-piston. There's a 4-piston. We call them 4-pot. So there's a 4-pot, 14-inch. and then a 6-pot 15-inch.
The 4-pot was on the EcoBoost Performance Pack, right?
Yeah,
works?
I believe so. Yeah, that's
we just
correct.
don't deal with a lot of EcoBoosts here, so I'm not as well versed in that particular engine.
Right. So there was always 3 major brake systems for the S550 Mustang. And they were all inverted hat.
Yeah.
An inverted hat rotor actually has a really good benefit for the daily driver.
Yeah.
It's seen on a lot of German cars.
Sure.
And then Ford is using it more widely because what it does is it has.
Flip that over.
If I can grab this,
Yeah.
it has pretty much a straight surface on this back end. So when it gets heated up, this surface here, pretty much since it's straight, it elongates straight, and it prevents warping or brake roughness.
Yeah.
So on a daily driven vehicle, it will provide good pedal feel at all temperatures for a long time. The downside is it's very difficult to cool. So it makes it a great daily driver rotor, but when we started looking at the S550 for the track, it had its downsides.
Yeah. So, and I know you can't talk about all those challenges, but what did you see, or what can you share with us you saw with the 14-inch brake on during track testing, and even before track testing, you did some straight line testing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk some of it. Okay. So my role was trying to figure out how to get these 6-pots, the 15-inch rotor that was inverted hat, to survive that durability testing for track.
And you went to the 15-inch just because, why? More thermal mass, or what was the advantage to the 6-pot versus the 4-pot?
Just like an S197 that had the track pack brakes, the 15-inch was the top of line brakes. So we started with that one, and we kind of knew early on that the inverted hat was going to have struggle on the track
because it's a relatively new engineering style for
it
rotors.
was okay. It was pretty much all new for the Mustang on the front. I think Mustang might have had one in the past in the rear, but don't quote me on that.
All the rears are this way on the GT and V6 cars, and right. So,
but it's the first time ever on the front of a Mustang.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I took one of those X1 prototypes that was S550 front, old Condor, those that you gotta follow the prototype of Ford lingo. That was the 0405. Shelby IRS that never survived. So we took one of those,
and you were part of that program too. That's pretty awesome. I've seen pictures of that. I'm a huge fan of the Condor. I wish we would have gotten IRS on the S197. Didn't happen, but
it was a pretty wild ride. I drove a few of those back in the day before it became a stick axle car. So a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I had an X1 that was basically IRS rear and S550 front, and developed my own test program for Ford, basically to superheat the brakes and see how well they cool. It was a lot of time at 100 miles an hour and a lot of time at 0.93 G deceleration.
Yeah, so brake, stop.
Just get them as hot as I could and see how long they would last. And I did a lot of iterations with inverted hat, 15-inch. And from ducting the back side, from ducting the front side, from ducting both surfaces, a lot of different things that were really wacky.
Yeah, I saw some of your under trays. I mean, you did some crazy stuff to try to cool that style rotor, and what was the result?
The result was almost no effect on cooling it. So basically, we were able to get the data to go to management and say, thanks for this 15-inch rotor. We've tried every we can, but it's just not working. I think we're going to have to sacrifice some of the attributes that are good about inverted hat, which is the drivability and brake pulsations at high temp, so that it will actually survive the track and go to conventional rotor.
Because there's really not a way to cool from the wheel side. You're always trying to pull cooling air from under the car and get it out through the rotor, and when it's solid on the back, there's nowhere for that.
There's only one way to cool from the side,
and
that's directionally pumping rims. So you have
back in the day,
sided rims, and if you do non-square setup, having a rim just for one wheel, it gets very costly. That it has to have propeller kind of action to suck air through it.
And styling would be kind of challenging too, I'm sure.
Styling challenging, and also fuel economy, because we talked about some of the features of the S550. One of the features it has on the front is an air dam. So
it goes around
the vehicle intentionally throws air around the tire, so it never actually touches the tire for increased fuel economy. So it would be a fascia change as well, aside from wheel changes. So as you look to how to cool this rotor from the outside, it gets very expensive very fast.
Very impractical. And the cooling, just pointing it at the backside or at the actual rotor face, just didn't do anything for you.
It was completely ineffective.
Yeah. So you proposed to go back to a standard non-inverted hat where you can get cooling air through the back and out through the rotor. Can you talk about what you did there? there, or any of the specifics? Or
so it was a lot of data. It was a lot of showing test data, and we had a 2-piece prototype that I think it might have been like an S197 vintage, kind of grafted onto the car. Non-production,
sure,
but basically showed that going back to a conventional hat, it would solve all the cooling problems that the inverter had. Even
without a dedicated ducted hose that goes right up to it, you just did some other things that actually made it into production.
Yes.
So you've got, but I call it the scoop and flap method that Porsche kind of innovated back in the day, and a lot of other car manufacturers have kind of gone to that, where it's taking air from under the car through a channel and directing it where you want it to go.
Right. So when I was doing the testing on the X1, throwing the kitchen sink at it, and it didn't work. But when we went to a conventional rotor, we were surprised by how incredibly effective it was. It way surpassed our expectations. It was much better than the Boss. And our target was at least Boss. So without using cooling ducts, dedicated tubing all the way to the knuckle, it was highly effective, and we basically completely eliminated all the cooling issues on the rotor. It was great.
And we've done a lot of cooling ducts with the hoses that go right to a backing plate, right to the rotor. And it's always a challenge with big wheels and tires. You get within the tire space, I think you called it. Tire envelope. And at full lock, we do see some tire rub on most of our brake duct kits. That's just normal. Most racers are used to that. You've got some new ideas that you've kind of worked with on your own personal car. Can you talk about your track rat? Have we talked about it yet? I don't think we have.
No.
So you've got a 96 Cobra. Tell me what some of the stuff you've done with that.
Sure. I picked up the car just to have fun. I've got a Boss Laguna that I wanted to kind of keep it off track, keep it nice for a while. So I picked up a Cobra as just a track rat. Lightened it up. It's got a Trimex, so the trans kind of bulletproof. It has some 31 spline axles, so it was a great foundation. Had
solid axle car, so not the IRS challenges. Okay,
right.
With heat.
And it was already had a tubular front end, so a lot of good stuff. So I bought the car pretty much almost at the same time I was doing all the brake testing. So I had the original brakes, were the PBR brakes, the 2-piston brakes, and
Which are challenging. I've had them on multiple cars. I'm sure you've seen some of the issues those have.
They worked good for what it was. And I applied my ducting and the front cooling, and also a deflector, the deflector design. I put that on it. And I'd never had any brake issues. It was a really great package. But I was starting to see, as I got better, and I moved to Arizona, and it's a little warmer out there.
Ambient temperature,
So I started seeing temperature climbs a bit into the mid 300s, and I always try to keep my brake temps low. So I ended up changing. I ended up making my own brake design, where I put a track pack, a Boss brake system on my car, and the tricky thing about that was I saw there's other kits out there, people that are
big spacers
selling it, and it's kind of snowball effect. If you get their kits, you have to space out the caliper and the rotor, and use longer studs, and you have to change the offsets. And I wanted to keep all my car as much SN95 as possible. So I basically developed a kit to put that brake on SN95 and not have to alter the offsets.
And we're excited about that. I'm kind of hoping we can work with you, and John's building the Fox Mustang with SN95 front. We talked about doing that in-house, and it sounds like you've already done all the homework. So we might be working with Marco and trying to bring this to market. We'll do some testing, obviously, on John's car. I know you pushed the car really hard. You've taken some of the people we see online, some of the racers like Drew Waldney and Chris Wynn. You've taken them with you, and you're pushing the car pretty hard. And I know some of the guys like, he just does DE events, but you've done a lot of testing it for it, and you can't really get into all that. But I know you've got a lot of miles on track, and you know how to push a car and get it heat in the brakes.
And the best part is, when I was at Ford, the guys that did the Boss program, all the Vehicle Dynamics guys, those are ones I worked with. So the Boss guys, pretty much some of the best guys in Ford for driving. The ones that taught me how to drive, and then I had access to a lot of Ford tracks and wet pads, so I was able to kind of fly under the radar and get a lot of training, and it's that training that helps me have fun with other guys, and that's where like Drew and Chris and those kind of guys like to ride with me, because I give a pretty good ride.
You never went through the training you never got the certifications for like Tier 3, Tier 4, but you worked with a lot of those guys and did a lot of same driving, I'm sure.
Right, because I was on a different path than someone who does that. So I was more on the managerial path. And someone who's going to get that type of training, that investment, is going to stay in vehicle dynamics. So I was more of a transit, and that's why it didn't really make sense for the company to train me at that level.
Sure, that makes sense. So you run a lot of Chuckwalla and Indy in your home state there.
Yeah, Chuckwalla, Indy, AMP, Wild Horse Pass. Hoping to go to Laguna Seca now that I'm closer and take my Laguna there.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
And my home tracks used to be Groton and Michigan, Mid-Ohio, so all the Midwest tracks used to be. So I'm learning all the new tracks out west.
That's where our red S197 is living now, is at Groton and right around Michigan. The guy that bought it works up there for the big three, so kind of small world. And you're talking about going to time trial. It's just a matter of finding a right home for your car. The 96 Cobra's got some challenges as far as TT3, TT4. We talked about that a little bit offline, and there's a bit of transience in the rules right now that's kind of frustrating several of us. So not a good home for your car right now in time trial, but hopefully that kind of opens up with some rule changes, and get out there, because it sounds like you'd be pushing hard. On the S550, some of the challenges we're seeing now that we've been working on these since 2014, right when they came out, and we worked with Aaron Sockwell's car and did some testing with that, but I didn't do a lot of driving other than in bone stock form. I drove a few, and then we went back to our S197 and some other cars, BMWs and Corvettes, and now in 2018 we came back around. We bought one. We bought a base model car with these brakes. We had real challenges. You weren't surprised when we saw 8 laps in the pads disintegrated in a brand new car.
I was actually surprised you got to 8 laps.
And there's different levels of drivers, and I'm not talking bad about people that can make these brakes last with the stock pads, but if you're pushing hard, if you're at the front of the grid, these just don't have a lot of hope. We do sell upgraded pads to guys, and they're making them work, but there's going to be a certain point where you want to go to the 15-inch brake at a minimum, and that's an easy upgrade.
Yeah, I would say that the risk of if just you doing a pad change is you're still going to be getting a lot of heat into the rotor, and then you might start getting close to the integrity of the rotor, or the fluid temps are still going to be pretty high. So the changing pads is a good first step, but as someone gets better and faster, they should do some more upgrades and get away from the inverted head.
Now, can you talk about the suppliers of who made the calipers and all that, or is that?
Well, I think the supplier for this one, it's written on it.
Yeah.
And they basically stayed through the program, so all calipers come from the same company.
Okay.
And there's some changes made to make them more cost effective.
Yeah.
They got bigger, they got heavier, but they're essentially the same. When you look at the 4 pots, they're
pad shape is really somewhat similar.
Very similar. Yeah.
The actual caliper for the 6-piston I don't have out here. It's on the car. It's about the same size and weight as the 4-piston, but it's got a bigger pad, and the pistons are all the same size. It's not a differential piston or anything crazy like that, because that gets too spendy for OEM level stuff. So, the car. Can you talk about the track rating or non-track rating of the GT, or is that off limits?
Well, I would say that the S197 had a track pack and it had a boss, and then now we have a performance pack.
Yeah.
So it's a different level. If someone wants to be at the track pack level, they should probably look into a car that has coolers on it.
Yeah, so coolers, again, check your fluid levels frequently on the S550 Getrag cars and the axle. That's something we're keeping an eye on, and we're hoping to make a cooler for the differential that's not just, let's go buy the Shelby one, which is a beautiful unit, but it's a little bit specific to that car and the under tray and all that. But the transmission, there could be challenges. We're going to try to make a cooler for the Getrag. If it doesn't work, and we're going to do some testing before and after, we may just have to go to the Tremec that we put the Magnum XL in some cars, and that solves a lot of problems. The gearing is also really strange. In the 18 model, they changed the gearing, and every track I go to, I'm always in the wrong gear. It's lugging, it's revving out too much. It's frustrating, and I don't think I can fix it with just a rear gear change, because they've changed the internal gear set.
Spacing.
In the D4 version. So, well, cool. You got anything else you want to add, or suggestions about the S550 that you saw that you can share?
They were great cars coming out of the box.
Yeah.
Really capable. We were surprised about how fast they were. The goal on the S550 was on the performance pack to be faster than the boss. That was the baseline.
Yeah.
And far surpassed that.
Yeah. And on short stints, low number of laps, you could beat the boss.
Right. Until we got some of the cooling issues resolved on the brakes, and then other issues arose. But from a lap time perspective, it's a very capable car.
Yeah.
And then that was before the performance pack level 2 came out. So now I've been hearing a lot of good things about that, as my friends are working on that.
Sure.
A lot of positive things about that car.
Big sticky tires. I mean, some of the same solutions we're known for, putting the biggest wheel and tire in car you can on the car, and the stickiest compound, and voila, it gets faster. You can't really over tire a 4,000 pound car. It's kind of hard to put too much tire on these cars, I think. So, yeah.
And the dampers as well have a good big part, which you guys see as well. You guys use really good dampers in your cars, so same thing.
Yeah, MagRide is a little bit different. I mean, I think it's a more of a dual purpose. It works really, really well for street and track use, but there's a certain point where you can't make up for spring rate, and that's where coilovers come in. But that's a tough sell when you've already got the Performance Pack 2 car or a Shelby with MagRide. It's kind of tough to say, hey, let's throw these in the trash and put something different on. But we're starting to see more and more of those guys get more serious, and at some point they'll need more spring rate too. Well, hey Marco, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today, and actually flying into town. You were coming in for something else, but thanks for coming by the shop and showing us some of the stuff you could, and talking about some of the challenges and solutions with the S550. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Cool. All right, that's it for our first episode of Between Two Cones. We're renaming our Vorshlag Tech Tip videos to this, and we'll have more interviews with different people, interesting folks that stop into the shop, and sometimes it'll just be me talking to the camera, but this was a lot more fun. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time.